Hey y'all, welcome back. I'm Shayna Cersei and I'm so excited to paint with you today. So today we are going to be doing another page in our watercolor journals where we are going to be exploring drawing and painting these lovely little Nordic gnomes. And this project is a lot of fun. I've done this before. I did this on a paid subscription way back when I had one of those. So I'm going to recreate it for you today here on YouTube. We're going to draw this fella out as well as paint with watercolor and then also introduce for some of the white details in the hat. We're going to introduce our Dr. Peach Martin's Bleed Proof White. So let's go over supplies and materials really quick. I'm using a Bao Hong watercolor sketchbook. This is about a 6x9 size, 100% cotton, 140-pound cold press. I have 3 brushes with me today. I have a 4, a 6, and a 10. These are all round brushes, so the 4, 6, and 10 are the sizes, and they're Velvet Touch, Princeton Velvet Touch brushes. I am also using my Core watercolor palette, QOR by Golden. This palette is 24 colors. I made from a set of tube paints. So I bought the container, the metal tin here, separate, and the pan separate, and put the tube paints in them, and this is what I use regularly. And then I have a pencil, water, paper towel, your usual supplies and materials. And then Dr. Peach Martin's Bleed Proof White. This is an opaque water-based paint. That's what I'm going to use for my white details in here, so like those tiny white details, so I'm not painting around all of that. A great way to add little details to your paintings if you want. You can also, if you don't have this, you can use an acrylic, white acrylic paint will pretty much achieve the same results. It will be a little glossier and might be a little bit more tricky to get these really fine details. You'll have to water it down quite a bit, or you can use a white gouache. Both of those will definitely achieve the opaque kind of white detail on top of color. You can't, unfortunately, I get this question a lot, you can't use your white watercolor paint. So white watercolor won't sit on top. It won't stay white on top of a color. And the reason for that is white watercolor, just like all of our other watercolor paints in our palette, is transparent. So it is white, but you can see whatever you put it on top of through it. It shines through. So if you put it on top of red, you're just going to get a lighter pink color because they're interacting with each other. So that's important to know. Your white watercolor paint won't stay white on top. And that's the difference between watercolor versus an acrylic or an oil, which are opaque paints where the white sits on top or the lighter colors sit on top. Okay. So let's get started with the drawing. And this is the part people seem to really like in addition to the painting, is when I kind of give you a little bit of a step-by-step drawing tutorial. And this, it looks complicated, but it's really simple in terms of the drawing piece. So the hardest part about this guy is really tall, and I love the tallness of it. And my page here isn't quite as long or tall as this, so I have to shrink him down just a little bit. I can't make him the exact same size. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to divide my page into sections, so I'm making sure I'm keeping at least half for the hat and half for the body and the beard. Otherwise I'm going to get a really short body and beard with a really tall hat, or vice versa, a really short hat with a really tall body and beard. So whatever you want to do, you can make your gnome shorter by just shortening the beard and everything that goes with it and just have a really tall hat. That's great. That's just another look. But I just like this long kind of half and half proportional composition that I did for this one. So the first thing I'm going to do is the top of my gnome is going to be here. The middle of my gnome is going to be like right here. And then his feet have got to be here. I'm going to give myself a little space on the bottom so I'm not right at the very bottom. So just keeping that in mind. So I did just a little bow here for the hat brim. I have to get nose and beard under here and hat up here. And actually the hat is a little bit shorter than what I'm going to get for the body. And I'm going to switch that up. I'm going to move this line down just a little bit. And I had a kneaded eraser around here. So for my erasing, I'm using a kneaded eraser, like knead, like you knead bread or dough, Kneaded. These are great. You can find them online. Again, link in the description, or at your local art store. They help to preserve kind of the surface of the paper. So again, I'm going to move that hat line down a little bit because I want I really want the hat to be dramatic. It's kind of the focal point of this piece. Okay, so I have my 3 sections. I'm going to start with the hat and the brim of the hat here. We're going to just do a bow shape. I'm going to bring the sides up and do another parallel line, basically, with some rounded edges. So I'm going to round out the sides, round out the corners. So now we have our brim of our hat, and you can even kind of finesse that even more. Just erase the line, round out the corners, make it really kind of soft and fluffy. Perfect. Now I'm drawing pretty dark. I'm using a regular number 2 mechanical pencil. If you want to draw much lighter lines but still have that control, I would recommend getting a harder pencil. So a number 2 pencil, number 2 is like the hardness of the, excuse me, I have a little frog in my throat. The hardness of the graphite, and the higher the number, the harder the graphite. So an 8H is much harder, and even if I draw really hard, like I'm drawing pretty hard, my line is much lighter than what I drew down here. I was very gentle and soft with this number 2, and I'm drawing nice and hard with this number 8, and I'm only getting a very light line. So I would definitely recommend, if harsh lines are a challenge for you, keeping them light and not interfering with your painting, is to get a harder pencil. You can get a 4 or a 6 or an 8H. You can pick them up for a couple cents at your local art store. Okay, anyway, brim of the hat, and now the top of our hat, we're going to come to just below that mark there because that's going to be the pom-pom. And I'm going to do kind of a rounded off top, and then try not to make my sides too perfect and straight. Do not use a ruler for this. This is fabric, it's cloth. It needs to be a little lumpy and bumpy. And then we'll just draw like kind of a basic swooping shapes, but we'll do most of that in paint for the little pom-pom at the top. All right, moving on, we're going to draw our nose, which is basically just a half semicircle, half moon shape that tucks up right next to the hat so that some of it is going under the hat if you were to draw a full oval or circle. There we go. And then for the beard, again, I really do want this to be light. I'm going to draw in just some guidelines for myself. I'm going to do lots of swoopy sides to it, but I'm going to have it kind of come in a little bit like this and then swoop out. So it's thicker or thickest at the top and gets super thin at the bottom. It tapers in just like the hat. So it's like 2 triangles tapered, one towards the top, one towards the bottom. And then we're going to just do 2 little half circles. On the bottom here, these are his shoes. This will be the ground underneath him. And again, when we get to paint, we'll kind of put in all these details. He doesn't have any arms or body. It's all tucked in behind his hat. You can add a little smile or a little mouth shape in there, whatever you want to do. I'm just going to put like a little half grin here. Very illustrative, but it kind of gives it this sweet little look. Okay, so that's all the drawing we need to do. If you do want to map out your sections of the hat, you can, but that would be not putting in any detail, but just deciding where the color is going to be and where the white is going to be. So if this is all color, a band of white, color, we can do that just to keep ourselves on track. So I've decided the hat brim is going to be white. This will be in color, white, color, white, color. Okay. And we'll get to that when we start painting and putting details on. The white parts of this, we're not going to do with bleed proof white. We're just going to leave the white of the page itself. So this white background in here is just white paper. Same with here, here, here. Anything in the beard is all just white paper for the most part, and in the pom-pom. All right, so our sample is in red, so I'm going to do a different color just to switch it up a little bit. I wish I was live right now because then I could ask you what colors you would like to see. So we could do a blue or a green. I feel like those are my two choices. Maybe I'll do blue and keep it like in the winter theme. So I'm going to activate my, not my phthalo blue, my ultramarine. So I'm activating my French ultramarine, just adding some puddles of water to it. I'm actually running out of this. I have to resupply my ultramarine in here. I think I have some in my... So I'm going to just get a lot of this. I want it to be really dark at the darkest point. And I'm going to do this part first. We'll get to the nose and all of the other sections later, but I'm going to put this in so it can dry so I can then put my details on it. So for the hat, this section down here is going to be the dark blue. And you can make this as flat and kind of opaque as watercolor gets as you want, or you can give it some dimension by adding a little water, dipping your brush, making it a little lighter, maybe in the center, and then the edges will be a little darker. But again, this is cloth or fabric. It doesn't have to be flat. It can have some highlights and some shadows. Try not to overthink it too much. We're going to be putting lots of detail over top of it, so anything you kind of do on this layer, just remember that. Don't get too attached to it because you're going to cover a lot of it up. So you noticed I put some color down, I rinsed my brush off and added water and then just brought water back. A lot of people think they always have to bring paint back with them when they go back to their palette in their water. Sometimes you just need a little water. You don't need to bring paint with you. There's often plenty of paint on the page to manipulate and work with. And you can always add more paint later. All right. And we're just going to leave this one little section white. So you can see right there, we've already started. We have our nice base to our hat. It's coming together. It looks like something. All right, so we're going to let this whole section dry and we're going to work on the brim of the hat, the nose, the beard. We got to do some layers there too. I am going to lighten this up. So you saw where all my pencil lines were, but these parts are more delicate and the paint isn't as thick. So I do want to make sure the lines are a little bit lighter. All right, so for my next color, I'm going to use just some Payne's Gray. And we're going to be painting the white brim of the hat with gray. Basically, we're going to be painting the shadow of the brim of the hat. That is going to translate into making it more three-dimensional. And we'll leave the topmost part pretty much white. This part is curved under. So again, I'm using a nice wet line when I put down my first initial line. If you let it be too dry, it's going to dry almost instantly, especially on 100% cotton paper. It's going to get absorbed really quick and start drying pretty quickly. So that first initial line you want to make sure is nice, and my brush strokes are getting out of control here. It'll be okay because I have to put a shadow down here anyway. I'm going to put a little more in the corners here and just blend it out. Now my blue is still a little wet, so I want to really try to avoid going all the way to the top. All right, so let's just let that be. For now, I'm actually going to change the shape of this over here. I'm going to bring it down a little further and round it out a little bit. There we go. Okay, so we're going to let that be and let that dry. I really want to get into my nose. Let's mix some colors for the nose, because this is going to be a flesh tone color, so we can talk a little bit about color mixing. And while that's we're mixing those colors, hopefully the brim of the hat will dry so that we can get in and start painting the nose. So the nose is basically just a pinkish brown in this particular flesh tone that I'm going for here. And we can get that a couple of ways. I'm going to start with magenta, and I am going to add green to it. So your little color lesson, if you're not sick of me saying this already, is that red and green, I won't get into all the details and semantics, but red and green are opposite each other on the color wheel. So here's a green spectrum, here's a red spectrum. They're exactly opposite. Same is true for blue and orange. And for this purpose, violet and yellow. So yellow and purple, blue and orange, red and green. Those are our primary and secondary colors. So red, blue, yellow are our primaries. Violet or purple, orange and green are our secondaries. And across from each other is what's called a complementary color. So complementary colors, they mute each other or cancel each other out. If you keep adding blue and orange together, your goal is to get a very neutral brown or gray, honestly gray or black, in the center, but we're going to push this more to the brown side. So I'm going to use a little sap green, and I'm going to push that into my magenta. So I have my magenta here, sap green. And the more green I add, the greener, obviously, the pigment will get. And here, I'm just going to demonstrate this on the back of here. But if I want a very subtle, kind of peachy, muted pink flesh tone, I'm going to let it be more magenta than I am green. If I keep going green, I'll show you, keep adding more and more green, you're going to get a more brown. There we go. So this certainly could be better for shadows when you're trying to do a light skin tone. And then if you keep adding and keep adding more green, obviously it's going to start turning green, which is not necessarily what we want. There we go. So that's kind of the spectrum. We want something more like this. And then in addition to the color, we can add more paint to make it darker, more saturated, or less paint, more water to make it much lighter, blushier, softer, transparent. All right, so let's go back to, we got to add a bunch more magenta to here to get back to that pinky flesh tone we wanted for our Nordic kind of skin tone. So we're back to that pinky color, and I'm adding a lot of water to get a very light version of that. And we're just about dry. So I'm going to put on just one layer of this, and I'm going to leave a highlight in it. And we're going to come back and I'm going to go right up against the hat on my shadowy area. I'm going to do a couple of layers. So you can notice here, we have a very light pinky color in the middle and our highlight, and then we have darker by adding more paint and more, a little more green. This is a little more brown toned. We get those shadows. So we'll add a little more green to this and a little more magenta because I want it to be more paint, less water. I'm going to add a little bit. It's still wet, so this is going to bleed out and give us kind of a softer transition. So just a little, and then we have to let that dry again before we can put on another layer. Whenever you're getting frustrated with something and things are bleeding out or colors are bleeding into each other or they're not kind of staying where they are, you just have to walk away for a few minutes and let things dry. And I promise you will be more happy when you come back and have more control over your paint. If you're not going for the wet on wet, soft transition look and you really need to add some more defined layers, you just have to let things dry. A lot of people don't want to wait. Patience is a skill in watercolor. So let's go on and we're going to paint a bunch of our beard in. Okay, so we have this big white mass down below. This is going to be a combination of actually this really light version of this skin tone in some areas and then really light gray and a whole bunch of variations of that. So let's just add a bunch of water to this gray, this Payne's gray I already have. Start as light as you can go and still notice that there's actually paint on the page, but you want to start light. You can always go darker. I'm going to start around the nose with just short, choppy brush strokes. These are very, very light. I don't even know if you can see them, but you can see a very very light touch here. We're going to go darker. We have to get more definitive and darker, but we want those darker areas to be smaller, more refined. We're really just setting up our base shadows here. So under the brim of the hat, under the nose, and then we'll start to trail some of these down into the shape of the beard. We're going to define a few pieces. So you can see I have one here. A lot of my strokes are thicker at the top and get thinner at the bottom. If you make just straight, same thickness lines all the way down, you're going to have spaghetti beard. So again, it's probably hard for you to see most of this, but if you just watch and wait for a few minutes as I add layers, you'll get the idea. Okay, so now I have that first layer on, and that's going to dry. It's going to be much later. Let's go a little darker. I'm going to add a little more Payne's gray here, and I'm also going to add, I'm going to pick up a little bit of this. Oops, that's still very wet. I'm just going to, around the nose, kind of give it a little tint of this more brown color. And bring in this layer. Just a bit, you can see it's got a little color to it. All right, so let's let the beard part dry. It's a lot of letting things dry. And let's get back to, so magenta and sap green. We're going to get back to our nose. And the nose is mostly dry. As it bleeds out, it's going much slower. And I'm just going to add this like right around the edges and kind of under the brim of the hat. All right, we're going to let that dry again. We'll do at least one more layer on the nose. Okay, so while this bottom part is drying, before we put on an additional layer, we're going to jump to the hat. Before I do that, I am going to, just down by the feet, like under the beard where it's in shadow, I'm going to do a darker layer of Payne's Gray. Just right here. So this is like under the beard. It's in shadow, like you can't see under there, but just giving that. Leave the shoes alone for now. We'll do those at the end. Just like a little curtain under there. Okay. Let's go back up to the hat. While that continues to dry, it's almost completely dry, we're going to go into the white spaces and add some of the details to the white spaces. So I'm going to switch to my size 4 brush, and you can do any kind of patterns you want in here. Go ahead and look at like those kind of Nordic sweaters and fabrics and mittens and hats and the designs on them for inspiration. But I'm just going to go with like dots and zigzags and lines and hearts and things like that, snowflakes. So first I'm just going to actually draw in or paint in with my blue, just like a dotted line, a long dash line right here. And then above that, let's do dots. All right, and then above that, let's do something. I'm going to do like a V shape that goes all the way up to the edge up here. There we go. And then inside that, I'm going to do little dots inside that as well. So inside the little triangles that I just made. There we go. All right. I'm trying to decide if I want to do anything inside this white strip or if I just want to leave it a white strip. I think I'm going to do just a really thin blue line, and then I'm going to do like some alternating hashes. Oh, now it looks like now it looks like I made bricks. Let's add some little dots in there. Maybe that'll help break it up. But playing and experimenting, this is much more geometric. I'll add in some things like snowflakes and hearts into the blue area with my white, just to give it a little more organic, natural pattern versus hard geometry. Okay, let's see how we're doing. So this is nice and dry down here. I'm going to take one more pass at my nose right around the edge. I'm going to do a nice shadow underneath. I'm going to rinse off my brush. I'm going to go right to the edge of that just with a damp brush. There's not really any water like coming out of my brush. I'm just going to blend out the edge. And I got some blue in there, so my gnome's flesh is looking a little blue and purple. Let me warm it up a little bit. A little blue and purple versus that pinky color I was going for. Okay, so we're going to let that dry and we're going to build in some more shadows around it in the beard. So we're going to go back to our gray. And go ahead and test out your grays before you put them on. I have a pretty good sense of how dark mine are going to be. but sometimes we forget and we end up with something far darker than we want. So I went pretty dark, but now I'm just adding in not all the places, but a few places. Some more defining lines that are a little darker. Again, thicker at the top, lighter at the bottom, getting right up on the tip of my brush. And I think we will go back in and add a few little white accents with bleed proof white. I'll show you how that can be really helpful. You don't want to rely on it. It's really meant to just pop in a tiny bit more contrast. I'm working my way around. And finding a few spots where I'm just going to deepen the shadows underneath. So like down here where things overlap each other, and just make those separations a little bit more apparent. Right here, we'll do a little more shadowy area under this part. And then right across kind of the brim of the hat, where it meets the nose, I'm going to do an even darker line. Rinse my brush off completely. I'm going to blend that out right over the nose and just creating a shadow of the brim of the hat and some nice separation. Okay, so what are we going to tackle next? So we have to let that dry even more. Let's go down here to the shoes. So we're going to jump back to the hat, finish it off, but let's finish off our shoes. I'm going to go really dark Payne's gray to make little kind of black patiny leather. I'm going to leave a highlight area on them. So little white highlights to demonstrate that they're shiny. And then also just over top, not quite as dark as the shoes, but in this area again, where it's a little darker. This is one of those pieces where you really have to let it dry because there's so many subtle things going on and competing with some harsher things. I'm going to take a little bit of my Payne's gray, my darker Payne's gray, just go right around the edge and just put in a few. I feel like I'm losing texture over on this side. But I was saying you really have to let it dry completely for all of the kind of subtle pieces to really kind of come together. My brush has nothing on it except a little dampness, and I'm just going over these darker lowlights that I put in, shadows, and just blending them out. And I'm going to put a little bit more of a defined shadow right along the edge there. Okay. All right, so let's let all of that dry. Let's jump back up to our hat with our bleed proof white. Oh, let's do our pom-pom really quick, actually, while we're here. So the pom-pom, just like the beard, you're going to go subtle and then add a few darker areas on top. I'm just going to I start from the base and kind of swoop upwards, letting the top be white and fluffy, and we just give the suggestion but leaving a bunch of white areas. So there's our pom-pom. Okay. Bleed proof white. Now I left my jar of bleed proof white open a couple times, so it's pretty dried out, but it does reactivate with water. So I'm just adding a little water in here, getting things going. Nothing worse than like coming back in, use a bigger brush, coming back into the studio after using my bleed proof white, the next day coming in and realizing it's sitting on the desk wide open. I left it completely wide open. Again, not all is lost. It does reactivate with water. It's not as good as if I was using it fresh. I mean, it is. The paint will be as good, but it's just harder to like reactivate and get it going and get it the right consistency versus it's all ready as soon as you open your jar. When you remember to close your jar. All right, I'm using my smaller brush, size 4, and basically I'm just mopping it up and then kind of wiping a bunch of it off. So I have a nice little point. Okay, so let's start with, and nothing is here that I'm going to mess up. I'm going to start at the base, I think, doing some little triangles, like toothy triangles upward like this again. And once you start putting this white back on a dark background, it always creates a nice little contrast and a pop. Boop, boop, boop. Okay. I do really like the snowflakes on this one, so I'm going to try to recreate those. And I'm just going to do crosses and then slightly, so I'm going to do that all around, and then basically on the kind of the cardinal directions of the snowflake, the very top and the cross angle, here I'm going to put little dots. Boop, boop, boop. And they don't have to be perfect. The hardest part with this is remembering that you're working on a surface that is supposed to be fabric and rounded, so your design has to kind of follow that line. I didn't do a great job with this one. These are a little flat. I feel like they could have curved a little bit more. So I'm just going to put the dots above and below. There we go. And then up here, I'm going to do another dash line. And then up here, let's see, we can do, I'm going to do some diamonds. So I'm going to start at the edge and create like the side of a diamond. On here. And then go all the way to the edge here too, and let part of that diamond fall off the side. There we go, some little diamonds, and we'll give this some little dots in here too, above and below. And then in this very top one, I'm just going to do a really thin white line at the bottom, at the top, and then a dashed one in the middle. There we go. There's our fun little wintry hat. So you can play with designs to your heart's content, all kinds of different fun patterns. My advice is to keep them, the individual elements, simple as you can when you're creating a lot of them. All right, so let's finish off our little beard. I'm gonna go and just do a little more around the nose here. This is falling a little flat for me. So I just took some Payne's gray and I went around this one side of the nose just to give it a deeper shadow. And I'm going to take a few more darker shadows right around the nose area. Again, just a few. I'm not rehashing everything I already did. And I am going to come back in with a tiny bit of white. All right, so over those darker areas, we're going to take some of this bleed-proof white. Get a nice fine tip. And I'm just going to come back in with a few. I can even put a little highlight on the nose. If you kind of lost your highlight, you could do this for the highlights on the shoes if you kind of lost them in the mix. It's great for those kinds of things, like those little highlight things. Put it in a few spots in the beard. You're not going to really see it unless you put it over top of something that's relatively dark. And then we're going to call it a day. I got a little carried away here. And then last but not least, we got to put in that little mouth if you want to. You can leave this guy just like this. The mouth is very illustrative. We would normally not see a mouth on top of a beard like this, but I think it's just cute. It adds to the charm of this little fella. So just my very darkest Payne's gray. You should make sure everything is dry before you put it in. But there we go. All right, there is our fun little Nordic gnome. I hope you enjoyed this one, drawing and painting. I think he's super cute. Don't forget to check out the description for links to supplies and materials. I'm going to add just a little ground shadow underneath him while we talk. So supplies and materials, go ahead and leave a comment. I'd love to hear your comments and questions. Like the video, share with a friend, subscribe to the channel, all of the above. And last but not least, enjoy your day painting. Happy painting, y'all. I'm Shayna Cersei, and I'm so happy to paint with you today. So thanks for joining me. Take care, y'all. I'll see you for our next watercolor journal entry very soon.